Welcome back to the Making Sense of Money podcast, presented to you by P1FCU, where we tackle all the financial topics that matter the most to you. I'm your host, Tanis, and today we're going to be talking about the dangers of financial abuse in relationships. Joining me is Shelly Meisner with the YWCA. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
It's great to be here.
I thought before we break into the seriousness of this topic, we could maybe chat about what led you to your role at the YWCA and what you do.
Well, I've been at the YWCA for about 21 years.
Oh, wow.
I started there as an intern, and domestic violence has always been kind of a core passion of mine. It was something that was throughout my family and something that definitely affected my lifetime. So wanted to do something to help others and to help our community. Currently, I am an advocate coordinator. So primarily I help support and supervise some of our advocates, and then I run some of our support groups and facilitate our legal advocacy program.
Oh, how wonderful. I feel like it takes a special person to do that, especially when, it seems like it's hard to find those types of people. So
there's a lot of us out there.
Yeah, that's great work. Really great work. So many of us think that abuse is physical or emotional. Can you explain what financial abuse is and how it shows up in relationships?
Absolutely. When we think about abuse, you're right. We absolutely think of physical abuse first and foremost. And then I think we also will think about that emotional, verbal type of abuse.
Sure.
But financial abuse is a really common aspect of a lot of toxic relationships. And it has a bunch of different components to it, and every relationship's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But I would say kind of like the encapsulation of financial abuse really is all about controlling someone through finances. And, we've got a few different types of, some of the main things that we look at when we're talking about financial abuse are things like controlling access to monies. We see that in lots of different ways, from not having access to bank accounts or not being able to have access to, say, employment or education to be able to get a job yourself and have your own access. We see a lot of things like making unilateral financial decisions that may or may not be responsible financial decisions, right? Things along those lines. A lot of sabotage when it comes to the controlling access. Another aspect that we see a lot are essentially controlling the finances. And so we see a lot of things along like hiding assets or not allowing access in different ways, stealing money, selling things, maybe even getting loans or credit without the other partner's knowledge, right? A lot of the things that we see in financial abuse really do end up being hits to their credit, right? Destroying credit, a lot of high debt, and just not a lot of access to be able to get out of that debt. Another big one we see is using money to control in general. This is the one that I think we see a lot of the little pieces a lot more often, like using money as leverage. If you don't do A, B, or C, you're not going to get the money that you need to, say, buy school clothes for the kids or something along those lines. We see a lot of controlling to have access to necessities, in order to be able to get food in the house or to pay the power bill or things along those lines. Sometimes we'll see you have to do A, B, or C, or being able to have kind of full access to monies is not very common with financial abuse. But we also see the opposite, where we see somebody who is the primary financial breadwinner in the home, but still doesn't have a lot of access or control over how they're able to spend their finances. And so, one of the big things that financial abuse ends up doing is creating a lot of isolation, whether it be not having the finances to, say, be able to go visit family or friends, or, moving them to someplace isolated. But ultimately, we all know that having access to money means having access to options, means having access to freedom.
Yes.
And so that is a lot of times the way that they're controlling. Without that access to be able to make choices or be able to, say, leave a situation.
Or just live your life.
Absolutely.
Goodness. So what are some warning signs that you've seen or that you could maybe bring up that you would say to look for?
Well, first of all, usually when we look at warning signs, we see financial abuse tend to come in after some of the other red flags that we may see. One of the big red flags with an abusive relationship in general is to go from like, I just met you to I love you in practically no time. That's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
And if we see somebody where they have gone into a relationship really quickly and they're melding their finances together, that usually is a recipe for disaster.
Sure.
But we might see little signs like somebody that goes and spends a lot of money and has a high amount of debt, or that will say, have you pay for everything. They're little signs, but generally we see the signs of other types of abuse before we see the signs of financial abuse.
You mentioned it was kind of just a part of that like toxicity of the relationship. So you kind of touched on this a little bit on how someone would trap another one using their finances, even if they want to leave. Can you speak to kind of what that situation, maybe in a little bit more detail, because you mentioned it can be either way, you know, and with protecting information, like, is there a situation that could be maybe relatable to someone going through that?
So just to give like an example of what it may look like, is that?
Yeah.
Well, generally when we're looking at financial abuse, again, there's other pieces in place. A lot of times that means a lot of the emotional, mental abuse, so that you don't think that you're capable, or that you don't have the ability to be a financial wizard or something along those lines. We see a lot of mental and emotional abuse, making somebody believe that they either need to quit their jobs, or, we see a lot with the employment. So a really good example might be somebody getting together into a relationship and pretty quickly melding finances or something along those lines. And in order to say pay rent, they need to continue their employment. Well, maybe right before a big promotion or something like that, something we may see is them having a giant fight so that there's no sleep, and so that they can't be present for that promotion.
So it's like a domino effect of multiple different things.
Absolutely. And ultimately, a lot of what we see is that control. So a great example would just be not being able to make financial decisions without the other partner, or for the partner to be making those financial decisions without your input.
Gotcha.
And especially when they meld finances, a lot of times either they don't have access to the information, or pieces get missing. Money gets missing in different ways, or things along those lines. There's so many different aspects, really. But ultimately, like I said, we're seeing them control them through that money, or lack of the money.
Gotcha. Are there any myths or misunderstandings that you want to clear up as far as financial abuse?
Well, I don't think a lot of people understand financial abuse to start with, so I'm not sure there's a lot of myths about it, other than I see a lot of times with the myth of the idea of like the gold digger, this idea that you're with somebody who has the finances, and if they're not, say, giving you money or something along those lines, then they're being abusive. That's not what we're usually looking at. We do see some financial abuse where they won't allow them to, say, buy things like food or things along those lines, but that's really rare. A lot of times we're seeing them more or less sabotage their ability to, say, have good credit, or to be able to save up money for a purchase, right? We see that a lot. We're like, we need $3,000 to buy a new car, so we've got $2,500 in the bank, then all of a sudden they buy a boat. Or something where those mutual goals a lot of times never actually materialize through sabotage of some type.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I also think maybe not totally a misconception, but really just like the awareness that this is a type of abuse, like Absolutely. that it does exist, and it's not usually, like you said, the first type of abuse we think of when we hear that word. So awareness to it, and just that it exists, I think is really good for everyone. What about obviously you're there to help others going through this type of abuse at the Y. What are some other resources that people have, not only at the YWCA, but in the community?
I would say when it comes to financial abuse, probably the number one resource would be knowledge, right? To know, first of all, that what you're dealing with is not normal or is not okay. There's not a lot of like, go to this place and they'll solve all the problems.
Gotcha.
But we do believe a lot in getting, say, financial counseling, financial education. I think that can be a really big part of the resources that someone might be able to access, like things like consumer credit counseling or something along those lines, right? To get, let's say you now have a credit score of 300. How do we get you back to a place where you can, be able to get a loan, get an apartment, something with that credit score. We also really believe in financial literacy and knowing, so many people, I still don't know a whole lot about a lot of the financial aspects of investments and things along those lines. And knowing that those are options can be a really great way to help you get out of some of those. The Allstate Foundation does have a program called Moving Ahead. It's specifically for victims of domestic violence, and it kind of goes through some of the pre-ideas, things you may need to know, like getting your finances in order, financial literacy, things along those lines. Also, like things like doing a financial inventory. A lot of times we miss that we have these assets or these skills that really can bring in finances for us. And so kind of just knowing what your base inventory is can be really, really helpful. And so ultimately having additional support, I think, is the biggest key when it comes to resources. There's also a guide from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence that they call Hope and Power. It's essentially a guide to rebuilding after financial abuse. And so essentially statistics tell us that most people that have been through an abusive or toxic relationship, it takes them about 2 years to get back on their feet financially. And so we're not talking about something that, here, you go to this place and everything will be good. It's a matter of just building all of that over again. And anyone that's had to try to build their credit knows that's not something that happens quickly. And so
gosh, well, and that's the amazing thing about partnerships, like us sitting here today and talking about this. There's community support, different sides of the field. I mean, you have your side, which is a lot of that advocacy. Let me help you with calling P1FCU and seeing if we can figure out some kind of program that will help. So I think that's also really important too, is having the right people involved.
Completely agree. And I know a lot of places like Potlatch and different banks also have different types of financial counseling available.
Yes, absolutely.
And I know that a lot of times they can create these personal action plans to help people get on the path to where they need to do. And
huge.
Sometimes even just education, knowing that you can get a copy of your credit report.
Right.
That's one of those little things
I know,
I am always pushing with everyone we work with. Find out what's on your credit report. Find out, particularly with financial abuse, it's not uncommon for them to open up, say, a line of credit or get a loan in your name, or if you're married, you're attached to it without your knowledge. And so you could be financially liable for taking care of this, loan that you know nothing about. And so being able to check your credit report on a regular basis, I think, is really important.
Absolutely.
And not a lot of people know that annualcreditreport.com is a free way to get access to each and every credit report.
Not a scam. That jingle is real. The jingle is real. So like any other form of abuse, it's important for others, like family members, friends, coworkers, or whatever that it looks like. It's important for them to support and kind of almost not identify, but it's important to try to see if maybe something's going on. Would you say that's a big importance?
It definitely can be, particularly just in abuse in general, right? And
no one wants to talk about it.
No one wants to talk about it. And no one really wants to talk about money issues either, right? And so you put those two things together, and not a lot of people are sharing that they're having these kind of financial issues due to abuse. But having financial issues is a very common American thing.
For sure.
And so it's one thing that a lot of us can really identify with. And like you said, just providing that kind of support where I've been there, or I understand how hard it can be to get out of debt, or those things. Even just understanding that financial aspect without understanding the abuse behind it can really help someone that's trying to get back on their feet.
Absolutely. Even leveling with somebody, because it is nice to just know that someone else is in the same boat. Like if you guys are able to like trauma bond over your credit card debt, like sometimes that is helpful.
It really is.
Yeah.
And there is nothing, when it comes to abuse, probably the one thing that allows it to grow and be created is isolation. And so when you are able to share, talk, or get support, you break that silence.
Right.
And that silence is what keeps it all together.
Absolutely.
And so, anytime you're able to talk with somebody, coworker, friend, family member, it does help end that cycle.
Absolutely. Well, my last question I have for you is a question that we ask all of our guests, and that is, what is one thing that you wish you would have known about money earlier in life?
When it comes to money, it's one of those things. I wish I knew that I had more control over it. It was one of those things growing up is like you get a paycheck and then you spend that paycheck. And being able to understand the aspects of, like, I'm still not at an investment place financially, but just knowing how to use my money in a way that is empowering for me is something I wish I had known when I was younger, for sure.
Well, that's on par with what you're doing and how you're giving that guidance to the people that you see coming into the YWCA. So, well, thank you so much for spending time today going over this topic, which is a hard one for sure, but it's great, the awareness that you're bringing and then the partnership that we can provide to you. I think it's really special. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. And I think that long-term financial stability is such an important part of anyone's life.
100%.
And so to be able to have resources like, if you are going through abuse, something like the Y, and then to have the resources to understand the financial aspects that like people like y'all at Potlatch are able to give us is so important for us to live a full life.
For sure. Absolutely. It's a good partnership. That's for sure. Thank you. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. We hope you learned something new today and feel one step closer to making sense of money. Don't forget to check out our newsletter and subscribe at p1fcu.org. We'll see you next time.